Well, good morning, everybody. It's wonderful to be with you all here at Kingscliff this morning. I'm just going to set my computer here so I can see what's going on. I was sitting here thinking about it, and I calculated that I have spent around about, over the last 10 years or so, I've spent around about, we've got a proper stool, do we? That'll work. Yeah, that'll be easier. Now the musicians can have theirs back. Anyway, back to what I was talking about. I was nearly there. I spent around about 3 months here at Kingscliff Church, and this is the very first time I've ever been here on a Sabbath. And so that, of course, involvement with Arise and so forth, which has been absolutely wonderful. Today's subject is Daniel chapter 11, and I'm not quite sure whose bright idea it was to give me Daniel chapter 11, but here we go. So hold on to your seats. We're going to dig in and we're going to go hard in one of the most complex prophecies in many ways that there is in the Bible. Now, the interesting thing about Daniel chapter 11 is if you are a really serious historian, it's not actually that complex. But even for me who loves history, my level of history does not go to the depth of Daniel chapter 11. And so we need to find out, first of all, what is God trying to communicate to us in this particular chapter? What is the message that God wants to give to us? And what can we learn from it? How do we even begin understanding Daniel chapter 11? Okay, so there's a couple of things that we're going to look at first, and that is that in the book of Daniel, there are 4 prophecies. So I'll put these up on the screen here very quickly. Wait a minute. It'll help if I turn this on. All right, let's try. Okay, so here's your 4 prophecies of the book of Daniel. You have Daniel chapter 2, Daniel 7, Daniel 8 and 9, and Daniel 10 through 12. And they all follow a principle, and this is going to be really important for us to understand as we work through chapter 11, and that is the principle of repeat and enlarge. That's how God gives apocalyptic prophecies. It's the same when you go to Revelation. You start with 7 churches, followed by 7 seals, followed by 7 trumpets. It's all repeat and enlarge. And repeat and enlarge more or less works like this. The prophecy begins in the time of the prophet. It extends from the time of the prophet through to the return of Christ. And each time that prophecy is repeated, that same sequence is repeated, it enlarges on it and it gives us new and extra information. So we know that Daniel chapter 10 through 12, which is going to include chapter 11, is going to be based on Daniel chapter 2, because Daniel 7 is based on Daniel 2, Daniel 8 and 9 is based on Daniel 2. You've got the sequence of Babylon, Persia, Greece, Rome, imperial Rome, followed by papal Rome, followed by the judgment, followed by the return of Christ. You've got the same sequence of events in each one of those, but extra detail being added in each time. The other thing that is significant about the way that the book of Daniel is written is how the prophecies are structured. You don't see it quite so much in chapter 2 because the prophecy of chapter 2 was actually given to Nebuchadnezzar and the explanation was then given to Daniel. But you see it coming through in chapter 7 and chapter 8 and 9. And that is that God will come to Daniel and give Daniel a symbolic prophecy stretching from his time through to the end. And then Gabriel, he'll give it to him in a vision, then Gabriel will come and have a conversation with Daniel. And in that conversation, he will explain the symbolism of the prophecy and what the prophecy is all about. So you have a vision followed by an explanation. That's the format that you have. And in chapter 8 and 9, of course, 9 is simply a continuation of the explanation of the vision in chapter 8. There's no vision in chapter 9. It's just Gabriel comes along and has a conversation and continues to explain what chapter 8 was all about. When you come to Daniel chapter 10, you find that Daniel has a very, very short vision. It's about 2 verses long. That's it. And it's a vision of Jesus Christ. And after that, you have Gabriel who comes to explain the vision. So what's actually going on here? Because we don't have Gabriel making a big explanation of what the vision was in Daniel chapter 10 as he goes into chapter 11. And what it is, very simply, is this. Gabriel is giving extra information in chapter 11 of the prophecy of chapter 8, 7, 2. So Gabriel basically comes along in chapter 11 and he says, okay, you've already had these three prophecies in the past. What we're going to do now is, rather than having a new vision, we're just going to expand on them. And expand on them in great detail. In fact, in almost intricate detail. Almost for some people, you might find it to be tedious detail. You ask the question, why would God give so much detail? I mean, the reason that we don't have sermons a lot of the time on Daniel chapter 11, it's not one of those famous sermons that you will find, is because of how much detail there is in it. Well, there's a couple of reasons for that. And probably one of the first reasons that we're going to, well, one of the main reasons that jumps out to me when I look at what is happening here is that God is drawing a very, very stark contrast between His prophecies and the prophecies of all of the other prophets that are out in the world. So the world has always been full of prophets, and you can read about them in the book of Daniel. They call them sorcerers and soothsayers and, diviners and so forth. And the world is still the same today. You can still go and have your tea leaves read or your palm read or whatever it might be. Psychics and mystics and so forth out there always trying to make some money out of you by telling you the future. And all of them, this is what's significant, all of them are vague in their prophecies. They're all vague. Vague enough so that their prophecies will always come true. If they weren't vague, let's face it, lotto would not exist, would it? It would simply not exist if they were not vague. And I'll give you an illustration from the past. When Xerxes the Persian was invading Greece, the Greek kings, of course, went to their oracles and they're like, what's going to happen in this war? We need to know what the future is. And they're very worried and very concerned. And this was the prophecy that came back. It was either your glorious town shall be sacked by the children of Persis, or in exchange must all through the whole Laconian country mourn for the loss of a king. So Laconia, that is, of course, Sparta. Well, which king is that? Are they going to mourn for Leonidas, who it turned out to be, or Demophilus, or Leontiades, or any other of a multitude of Greek kings that they would be sad about, or allied kings? I mean, it could have been an Egyptian pharaoh that died because they were allied with Egypt. And so there's this prophecy, a king is going to die. It doesn't say when, it doesn't say what the events are. It just says a king is going to die and you're all going to mourn. Well, that's pretty vague. And God comes along, He's like, okay, I understand that you guys are used to hearing all of these prophecies from these different oracles and soothsayers and magicians and so forth. Let me give you a prophecy that will blow your mind with the amount of detail that's in it. Sometimes, when I'm doing Bible prophecy with people, they ask me the question, why doesn't God just speak a little bit more plainly in the Bible? Well, He does in chapter 11. And when He does, there's so much detail that people sort of shy away from it a little bit. We're going to have a look at some samples of it in just a moment. Okay, so we know this about Daniel 11. Daniel 11 is going to follow the principle of repeat and enlarge. Therefore, we know that it's going to begin with Persia. It's going to include Greece. It's going to include Rome. It's going to include the Antichrist or the Vatican. And it's going to include the judgment. It's going to bring us down to the end of time. We know that Daniel 11 is going to include all of those things because that's what we have in the previous prophecies, and they are going to be repeated. We also know this. If you go to Daniel chapter 1 and verse 1, Daniel 1 and verse 1, and my students should know this one. The theme of the book of Daniel is found right here. Theme of the book of Daniel is found in Daniel chapter 1, verse 1 and 2, where it says, in the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and laid siege to it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand with part of the vessels of the house of God, which he carried into the land of Shinar to the house of his God, and he brought the vessels into the treasure house of his God. So here's a question that jumps out right here. You have these two verses right at the beginning of the book of Daniel, and it sounds boring, and it sounds kind of dry and factual, but it actually contains the entire theme of the book of Daniel. It's all there in those two verses. So let's look at it. How many kings have you got? Two kings. Who are they? Jehoiakim and Nebuchadnezzar. How many nations do you have? You have Judah, you have Babylon. And how many cities do you have? Well, you've got two once again. You've got the city of Jerusalem and the city of Babylon, and they are in conflict with each other. Isn't that so? What do you have when you go to the end of the book of Revelation? You have Jerusalem and you have Babylon, and they are in conflict with each other. And so as soon as you find these two cities in conflict with each other, you know the book of Daniel is going to be all about the great controversy. And if the book of Daniel is all about the great controversy, then we are going to find that Daniel chapter 11 is going to be all about the great controversy. So let's take a moment to take a look at the first few verses, the introduction of chapter 11. And what I've done here is I've taken the liberty of filling in the gaps and adding in the names of the kings that have been mentioned. And I've put it in yellow. Now, this will work for you particularly well if you have a New King James Version. So for those of you who have a New King James Version, good. If you don't have one, pull one up on your phone and follow along with me. And I'll just give you a sample of how chapter 11 works. We're not going to work our way through chapter 11 verse by verse this morning, because we will most definitely be here all day if we do so. And there is a lot of detail there. All right. Let's see here. This went, okay, there we go. So here you go in verse 1. This is how it kind of works in verse 1. Also in the first year of Darius the Mede. Well, who's that? That's the son of Astyages, or Ahasuerus, Cyrus's maternal uncle. Even I, Gabriel, stood up to confirm and strengthen him. So you see what I've done here? I've just added in the names of the kings so that it makes it easy reading. Verse 2. And now I will tell you the truth. After Cyrus, who now reigns, behold, 3 more kings will arise in Persia. Cambyses the second, Smerdis the impostor, and Darius the great. And the fourth, Xerxes, will make Esther his queen and be far richer than them all. By his strength, through his riches, he shall stir up the realm of the Greeks, conquering all the tribes north of the Corinthian isthmus before losing at the battles of Salamis and Plataea. So add a bit of extra detail in there so that we know what we are talking about. And you can see here this prophecy just follows the previous prophecies, but you will notice that he's giving a whole lot more detail, isn't it? Okay. A mighty Greek king called Alexander the Great shall arise, and after his... And by the way, the passage here hyperjumps over a bunch of Persian kings. So if you go back here, it brings you down to the realm of the Greeks, and it's almost like Gabriel has a little bit of, ADHD, because he's like, oh, the Greeks. We've talked about the Greeks. Let me tell you about the Greeks. And so he hyperjumps a bunch of Persian kings, and the real reason behind that is not because he's just getting sidetracked, but those other Persian kings don't have as much of an influence in relationship to God's people, and so he moves on to the Greeks. Mighty Greek king called Alexander the Great will arise, and after his father Philip has united the Greek cities, he shall rule with great dominion and do according to his will, conquering all of Persia, the Levant, Egypt, and even part of India. And when he has arisen, his kingdom shall be broken up and divided toward the 4 points of the compass, but not among his descendants, nor according to his dominion with which he ruled. For his kingdom shall be uprooted and given to his generals. Cassander will take Greece, Lysimachus will take Thrace, Seleucus will take most of the north, including Persia, Babylon, and the Levant. Ptolemy will rule over Egypt. Ptolemy, the ruler of Egypt in the south, shall become strong, as well as one of Alexander's other princes, Seleucus. And after Lysimachus has conquered Cassander, Seleucus shall gain power over both their territories and rule the entire northern section of the Greek Empire and have dominion. His dominion shall be a great dominion. And what this does then is that it now brings us down to what we find in the book of Daniel as being the conflict between the king of the south and the king of the north. Now, if you want the rest of this, I've got it as a handout for you, okay? Because it's going to take you a bit of time to work your way through it. I understand you do some small groups here during the week, and you can have a wonderful time discussing all of the history that is there and looking it up on Wikipedia just to check it out and see how it all fits in. Okay, so now you have one Greek kingdom in the north and another Greek kingdom in the south. Why are they called the kingdoms of the north and the south? The orientation of the prophecy is based around God's people in Judah, in Jerusalem, and the direction from which you approach. So if you're approaching Jerusalem and Judah from the north, you've got to come down from the north because you've got the Mediterranean on one side, or you've got the Arabian desert on the other. If you're coming up from Egypt, once again, you've got to come up from the south. So this introduces us to the concept of the king of the north and the king of the south. And there's a whole bunch of detail that you could work your way through from that particular point. But we are going to skip through to the interesting part that if I gave you the handout beforehand, you would have all skipped to it, and that is the last few verses. And I was going to say on this, there's a variety of Adventist interpretation in relationship to the king of the north and the king of the south, which is great. This morning I'm going to tell you the correct one. No, there is definitely a variety out there, and that's not a bad thing. It's something to keep us humble, I believe, and to remind us that we don't know everything there is to know about this prophecy. And let me tell you this. I know less about Daniel chapter 11 than any other chapter in the book of Daniel, or Revelation for that matter. But we're going to establish a few things that are very important. All right, so when it comes to the king of the north and the king of the south, what we're going to find is that partway through the prophecy, in fact, a fair way through the prophecy, the language is going to move from being very literal language to being symbolic language. And the moment it does, we have to identify, okay, who is the king of the north and who is the king of the south? And what you're going to find is that the king of the north has the same identifying characteristics once you reach the symbolic part of the prophecy as the Antichrist. So you've got your Antichrist, your little horn in Daniel chapter 7, Daniel chapter 8, you've got the Antichrist coming through there. And we're going to look at very quickly. It's not hard to see that the little horn is, a continuation, repeat and enlarge. So we're not adding new members in here, new ideas, new concepts. Uriah Smith, one of our great founders, he tried very hard to put Turkey in there because Turkey was a major superpower in his day. But when you look at the prophecy and it goes, Babylon, Persia, Greece, Rome, imperial Rome, then papal Rome, then the judgment, and then the little horn, it's like, okay, all our prophecies up until this particular point, they went through Babylon, Persia, Greece, imperial Rome, papal Rome, judgment, second coming, and just when you thought that chapter 11 was going to do the same thing, guess what? It's Turkey. No, it's not Turkey. That does away with a principle of biblical interpretation. And God bless Uriah Smith, but basically what he was doing was taking what he was reading in the newspaper at the time and fitting it into what the Bible had to say. So we're going to look at how the papacy fits in here, the Antichrist that you find in chapters 7 and 8, and then we're going to discuss the king of the south, because that does get very, very interesting. All right, so verse 31. What do we got here in verse 31? Let's go. Okay, so let's follow through. If you've got your New King James there, forces shall be mustered by him, they shall defile the sanctuary fortress. Then they shall take away the continual practice of pagan worship. Oh, I'm going to get some people stirred up on this one. And place there a version of pagan worship that is blended with Christianity called the abomination of desolation. This is the same abomination of desolation that this is Gabriel, I've written it in the words of Gabriel here, spoke to you about in the symbolic prophecy given in the third year of Belshazzar's reign, Daniel 8. Those who do wickedly against the covenant, the papacy will corrupt with flattery. But the people who know their God shall be strong and carry out great missionary exploits under the most difficult conditions. And those are the people who understand the Bible shall instruct many, leading them to Jesus. Yet for many days they shall fall by sword and flame, by captivity and plundering at the hands of the Vatican-inspired crusades and inquisitions. And when they fall, they shall be aided with a little help. A reformation will take place, and their influence shall begin to grow. But many, like for example, Henry VIII of England, will join them by intrigue for political reasons. And some of those of understanding of the gospel shall fall in the crusades and the inquisitions to refine them and purify them, make them white until the time of the end, because it is still for the appointed time, coming at the end of the 1260 days of the prophecy, given you in the first year of Belshazzar's reign. Then the king shall do according to his own will. He shall exalt and magnify himself above every god, shall speak blasphemy against the God of gods, even claiming to be God, and shall prosper till the wrath has been accomplished, for what has been determined shall be done. In the future time, one of your people called Paul will write of this in a letter to the Thessalonian church in Macedonia. That's in 2 Thessalonians 2. He shall regard neither the God of his fathers, because he considers himself to be God, nor the desire of women, for he shall institute the evil doctrine of celibacy, which the prophet Paul will also address to a young man he mentors named Timothy. He will actually not regard any God, for he shall exalt himself above them all. But in their place he shall honor a God of military power, wherewith he can conduct his crusades and inquisitions, and a God called the Pope, which the church founders did not know. He shall honor with gold and silver, with precious stones and pleasant things. And we can continue. Oh, we'll finish this one. Thus he shall act against the strongest fortresses with this foreign god, which he shall acknowledge and advance his glory. He shall cause his church to rule over many, divide the land through political maneuverings for gain, even going so far as to make salvation a piece of merchandise that can be bought and sold for profit. And so here we have history of the Dark Ages, and the church that dominated the world during the Dark Ages was the Vatican. And if you go back and study the history of the Vatican, you'll find that they did a whole bunch of really terrible things. On average, about 40,000 people a year died as a result of the various crusades and inquisitions that were conducted by the Vatican at that particular time. And that doesn't mean that Roman Catholics are bad people. That means that Roman Catholics are good people. They're just part of a system that is run by human beings that became very corrupt and did a lot of terrible things. That's not new to our world, is it? We are well and truly used to that in our world. All right, so then we come on and we need to talk about the King of the South. So we have to ask ourselves the question, because the Bible now talks about the conflict between the King of the North and the King of the South. Who is the King of the South? And why is there this emphasis all the way through the book of through the chapter, Daniel chapter 11, of this conflict between the King of the North and the King of the South? Okay, when we look at it geographically and historically, when you had when you had, say, Seleucid kings in the north and Ptolemaic kings in the south, for example, and they're fighting each other as they invade north and then as they invade south, who is stuck in the middle? Who's caught in the crossfire? Judah, God's people. They are the ones who are caught in the crossfire between the conflict between the king of the north and the king of the south. They are jammed in there and they are getting hammered every time. A Ptolemaic army comes up from the south, or a Seleucid army comes down from the north, or the Romans, because it moves on, of course, to the Roman era. And, of course, you've got how Rome eventually destroys the city of Jerusalem and the temple and so forth. You've got some Seleucid kings who do terrible things there as well. We need to find out, who is the king of the south? Okay, so the king of the south has always, only, ever been, in the Bible, Egypt. And how do we understand where does Egypt fit in? Well, to understand that, we're going to have to go to the book of Revelation. We're going to have to make this fast. How long have I been going so far? You got me started on chapter 11. I could be here all afternoon, and I don't see a clock anywhere, so someone's going to have to be timekeeper here and tell me when to just stop preaching. But okay, the book of Daniel is explained by the book of Revelation. And in the book of Revelation, Egypt comes up, and it is found in Revelation chapter 11. Oh, we're going to go through this fast. In fact, let me just skip this slide here. Oh, wow. Okay, Revelation chapter 11. Egypt is central to this chapter, and this chapter is all about the two witnesses. I give power to my two witnesses, they shall prophesy 1,260 days, clothed in sackcloth. That time period, of course, coming from Daniel chapter 11, amongst other places. These are the two olive trees and the two candlesticks standing before the God of the earth. If anyone hurts them, fire proceeds out of their mouth and devours their enemies. If any man will hurt them, he must in this manner be killed. These have power to shut the heavens so that it doesn't rain in the days of their prophecy, and have power over water to turn them to blood, and to smite the earth with all plagues as often as they will. When they've finished their testimony, the beast that comes out of the bottomless pit shall make war against them and overcome them and kill them. And their dead bodies, here we go, shall lie in the street of the great city, which spiritually is called Sodom and Egypt, where also our Lord was crucified. So this prophecy is all about the two witnesses. And a lot of people say, well, the two witnesses are obviously Moses and Elijah. You know, Moses turned water into blood, and, you know, Elijah caused drought for 3.5 years. This is obviously Moses and Elijah. But that's actually impossible, because the Bible says here, he took Peter and John and James, went up into a mountain to pray, and the fashion of his countenance was altered. His clothing was white and glistening, and behold, there talked with him two men, which were Moses and Elijah, who appeared, notice here, in glory. How were they able to do that? Well, the Bible says that Elijah was translated to heaven without seeing death, and Moses was resurrected. We have the record of that in the Bible. Now, the Bible says that our body will be changed, our vile body will be changed and fashioned like unto his glorious body, and when that takes place, we will receive the gift of immortality. So if Moses and Elijah appear in glory, then they have the gift of immortality, and here the two witnesses die. So we know that it cannot be Moses and Elijah, but it can be related to them. All right, in the Bible, right here in Revelation 11, we have these four symbols: candlesticks, witnesses, prophets, olive trees, and they have a number of things in common: the Word, the Gospel, the Scriptures, and the Word of the Lord. Let me ask you a question. Does the Bible contain two witnesses to Jesus Christ? Yes. The old one pointing forward, the new one pointing back. When Moses turned the Nile River into blood, did Moses do it? No. How did that happen? The Word of God did it. It was the power of God's Word that did it. When Elijah brought fire down from heaven, did Elijah do that? No, it was the Word who did that. What we're dealing with here is the two witnesses to Jesus Christ. But then we come to the beast from the abyss that kills these two witnesses. It's a nation, and it's symbolized by Egypt. And I've put atheism there. Why have I put atheism there? You'll remember that when Moses came to Pharaoh and said, God has said, let my people go. Pharaoh said, who is God that I should serve him? And most of the time when we read that, we assume that Pharaoh is simply, questioning who is Yahweh, who is this Jewish God. But he's actually not, because if you study Egyptian history, what you'll find is this. At the higher levels of Egyptian religion, they were atheists. They were pure, and you say, how could that be? They got like 3,500 gods. Every one of those gods was a personification of the forces of nature. And the personification of those gods was how they controlled the masses. But in the elite levels of Egyptian religion, they were pure atheists who did not believe in the existence of any divine supernatural being. And so when Pharaoh says, who is God? Pharaoh is basically saying, Moses, why are you coming in here talking to me about God? You were trained as an Egyptian. You were trained at the highest levels. You know there's no such thing as God. Why should I serve him? And so this is what is taking place here. And so Egypt becomes a symbol of atheism. Sodom, symbol of sexual immorality. Jerusalem, rebellion against Jesus. A nation that will legislate against the Bible for 3.5 years, proclaim a public holiday to celebrate the event, and then reinstitute it 3.5 years later, coming at the end of the 1260-year prophecy. Did such a thing happen? It most certainly did, and it happened in the French Revolution. Let me see here. The Bible was banned in the French Revolution on November 23, 1793, and exactly 3.5 years later, it was restored by the government. God does not work with approximations. God works with exactitudes. Praise God. These are not like the prophecies, other prophecies that we have. I know I'm moving through this very, very quickly here this morning, but I just want to skip back to something that I skipped over here a minute ago. And this was an interesting statement by Ellen White, because she says this. She says, at the same time, anarchy is seeking to sweep away all law, not only divine, but human. I want you to stop there and think about that for a moment. Do we find anarchy against God's law in our world right now? Do we find almost a desperation to get rid of God's law? There is nothing that society in the West hates more than the word sin. Because the word sin in our society today is violent speech. The moment you use the word sin, that is violence. It's classified as violence. The centralizing of wealth and power, the vast combinations for the enriching of the few at the expense of the many, the combinations of the poorer classes for the defense of their interests and claims, the spirit of unrest, of riot and bloodshed. So let me ask you, do we see that in our world right now? We see it a whole lot more than when Ellen White wrote it back whenever she wrote it there for the book Education. I don't have the date. She continues on, the worldwide dissemination of the same teachings that led to the French Revolution are tending to involve the whole world in a struggle similar to that which convulsed France. So in other words, if we understand what took place in the French Revolution, we can understand some things about what is taking place in our world today. And we ask ourselves the question, why would God put a chapter in the Bible in Revelation chapter 11 and talk about the French Revolution? It's really got nothing to do with us here in Australia. Well, you know what? It kind of didn't for a long time, but it certainly is now. I'm going to talk a little bit about that because this is going to help us to understand this conflict between the king of the north and the king of the south, and how they are clashing against each other, and how Christianity becomes the collateral damage in the middle. Okay, let's move on through here very quickly. Covered a lot of ground here, so hey, come and hammer me with questions afterwards. Where are we up to? Let's go to. All right. So the French Revolution. What's the French Revolution actually all about? Let's have a bit of a think about this. Two different kinds of democracy that came about at the end of the 1260 days. You had illiberal democracy and you had liberal democracy. Illiberal democracy is based around majority rule, which is another word for mob rule. The majority is right, therefore we follow what the majority. So this creates the protection of the majority. Liberal democracies, such as came out of the United States, so both of these democracies were rising at the same time, had a lot of things in common with each other, was based around not majority rule but constitutional rule. And so they recognized that over here they believed that human beings were basically good. Over here they believed that human beings were basically bad. So if human beings are basically good, then the majority is going to be good. If human beings are basically bad, in other words, sinners, then we need a constitution that is good to limit sinners. So one created protection of the majority, other created protection of the individual. Improvement over here was by law, so we legislate improvement. Over here it was more by character. This was more based around equity. This one more about equality. So equality of outcome versus equality of opportunity. Now, to bring about that kind of equity, well, how do you actually do that? Well, you have to level everybody, and the way that you level everybody is by having a mass cleansing, which they had in the French Revolution. A lot of people died, and of course, the change over here. And these are kind of the founding fathers of these different philosophies. It can all be boiled down to this kind of a concept here. Illiberal democracy gives you equality over freedom. Liberal democracy gives you freedom over equality. And this is what I see happening in our world right now. These two philosophies are in conflict with each other, isn't that so? Particularly amongst young people, there is a massive clamoring for equality over freedom. That's the direction our world is heading right now. And when I read Ellen White's statement, I suddenly realize that, yeah, you know what? The foundational principles and philosophy of the French Revolution are being taught right across the West right now. This is part of the discussion that's taking place. Another way of looking at it is like this right here, the incorrupt nature of man, or the corrupt nature of man, and it will give you these two different scenarios here. This one will give you freedom from discrimination, whereas this one gives you freedom of conscience. Two very, very different scenarios. There's a lot of similarities between the two, and there was a lot of, if you look at the history between France and the United States, there was a lot of crossover of ideas, but that simple formula of placing equality over freedom created a vast difference. French Revolution came along, and here's 10 significant things that happened in the French Revolution. Number one, prayer became a crime. Did you know that right now, if somebody was to call me on the telephone from Victoria and ask me to pray for them, and I respond by praying for them, if their request is about the wrong thing and I honor their request, what they have asked me to pray for, I can be extradited from New South Wales or Queensland and be imprisoned in Victoria. That's right now. A month ago, there was a lady arrested in the UK. Do you know what she was arrested for? She was arrested for thinking wrong thoughts silently in her mind. That happened in the UK. She was arrested because she was thinking the wrong thoughts in her mind. The background behind it was she was standing outside of an abortion clinic and apparently silently praying. So she was standing there like this. And she got arrested for that because she was thinking the wrong thoughts in her mind. You kind of wonder, why are people who do not believe in prayer so scared of people who pray? Okay, prayer became a crime. There was a dismantling of history. Yeah, we've seen a lot of that recently. Statues being toppled left, right, and centre. Rather than telling the true story of the statue and learning from history, it's like get rid of history. Influential people in the media called for people to be cancelled. Back then, being cancelled was guillotined. A little bit more severe than what we've got right now. Let me see. There was a change of language that took place. There was a new language that came in. There was an implementation of censorship, because if you're going to create equity, you have to create censorship so that people can only think one way. There was a justification of violence for the sake of creating a new system. And so we've got all this violence happening, but we're not going to create it without violence. Marriage and the family were publicly, nationally, legally undermined. Do we see that happening right now? Yeah, we certainly do. Absolutely. There was a murdered criminal that was used as a justification for violent change. This is interesting. The Enlightenment was a movement of the awakened. That's who they were called. So the enlightened people were referred to as the awakened people. You know what word you get if you shorten the word awakened? Woke. That's the shortened version of awaken. History repeats itself, right? Same thing happening over again. The 7-day week was replaced. The reason that the 7-day week was replaced was because they saw that it had an origin in religion, and they wanted to get rid of everything that was religious-based. They created a metric week that didn't work out for them, and they had to go back to it. The result of this was that 40,000 people died. But then the further result was, as the philosophy spread around the world, that you had a lot more people that began to die all over the world, so that if you look at the 1260-year prophecy of papal persecution, about 40,000 people were dying per year, but when you look at the history of socialism, you've got about nearly 500,000 people dying per year over the last couple of hundred years. And so you take God out of the equation and it gets a whole lot worse. And so, we look at this right here and we ask ourselves the question, this is exactly what we have in our world right now. But then you look at the other side of the equation. I don't have time to go into it. But, people come to me and they're like, they get all, fired up about the various, political sides in our world right now. And, you have kind of two choices. You can be on the right, like the religious right. That's where you're going to find the king of the north, okay? The religious right. And people say, well, they're standing up for religious liberty, which they are, which is one of our core foundational beliefs as Seventh-day Adventists, right? So should we support the religious right that supports religious liberty, but at the same time also supports union of church and state? And wherever you get union of church and state, you get religious liberty being done away with. Okay, so that's a problem, and you find typically your evangelicals over here on your right, you find your mainline Protestants over here on the left, but the atheistic left, should we be supporting the atheistic left? They will tell you that they're much more nicer to people, they're more loving to people, all of that kind of thing. Well, you look at the history of it, not so much. The answer is, this is the picture that we are being given in Daniel chapter 11. God is telling us, you're in the great controversy. Is neither one side nor the other. You need to be focused on Jesus Christ, not on this political movement, that political movement, or the other political movement. I don't care who you vote for. That's between you and God. That's not for me to be preaching about. Okay? And I've got to tell you right now that you can go to either side. Your socialist left that absolutely hates religious liberty, or your evangelical right that loves the union of church and state. They both end up in exactly the same place, and that place is God's people being caught in the middle. Okay? That's what Daniel chapter 11 is all about. All the way through Daniel chapter 11, I'm going to give you a handout of the expanded version of Daniel chapter 11, and you're going to find the whole way through God's people are being caught in the middle. And when you go to the middle of the chapter and you go to verse 22, what are you going to find? You're going to find that Jesus is caught in the middle. And when Jesus is caught in the middle, Jesus dies. And the great thing about that, of course, is that he dies for us. Where are we right now in our world? We are caught in the middle. And if we want to be on the right side, the correct side, I should say, the place that we need to be is where Jesus is, and that is caught in the middle. We need to be followers of Jesus Christ. We shouldn't be following this party, that party, or the other party, because they will all let you down, because they are all human in origin. But Jesus will never let you down. There's actually very little in Daniel chapter 11 about Jesus. It's one of those kind of chapters where it's like, okay, where's Jesus? Where's Jesus? You're looking all the way through it. Oh, there he is in verse 22. And then that's kind of it. It's like, why would God do that? It's because God is explaining to us the great controversy. And he's telling us so clearly in this chapter, do not be distracted from your calling. As Christians, we have an incredibly solemn calling, and that calling is to give the message of Jesus Christ. In fact, I'm going to skip to the end. Let me skip to the end here. Oops, there's the end right there. Here it is. We live in a world where to stand up and say, I'm a follower of Jesus Christ, I am somebody who believes the Bible, people are going to automatically think that you are a person involved in hate speech. And you're going to be looked down upon. But what does the Bible say? For I'm not ashamed of the gospel of Christ. Why? For it is the power of God unto salvation to everyone that believes, to the Jew first, and also to the Greek, to the left and to the right. It's the power of God to salvation. For therein is the righteousness of God revealed from faith to faith, as it is written, the just shall live by faith. Daniel chapter 11 is given to us today to tell us, don't look to any human organization, look to Jesus Christ.